Chapter 10 of The Lost Boy. Breakaway. During the middle of my sophomore year in high school, I grew frustrated and bored. Because I had moved so much and never stayed in one school for more than a few months at a time, I was placed in a class for slow learners. And I fought the idea at first until I discovered that very little was expected of me. By then, I abandoned all of my academic studies, for I knew my future lay outside the school walls. I was putting in over 48 hours of work a week through a string of jobs, and I believed that nothing I learned from high school could be used in the real world. My hunger for work was fueled by the fact that I was 17 and I had less than a year to go in foster care. During sixth period, I'd raced from school to Alice's home, page 284. I would change clothes, then speed off again to one of my jobs at a fast food restaurant or the plastic factory, where I worked until 1 or 2 in the morning. I knew that the odd hours and the lack of sleep were taking their toll on me. In school, teachers had to prod me awake as I snored in their classes, and I resented the kids who laughed at me. Some of those same kids acted high and mighty whenever they saw me labor at the restaurants, strutting in to show off their dates, wear flashy clothes, knowing that they would never have to work like I did in order to survive. Sometimes during my free period, I'd stroll over to visit my English teacher, Mr. Tapley, and since he didn't have class that period, Mr. Tapley used his time to correct papers. I'd plant my elbows on his desk and bug him with an endless stream of questions about my future. He knew how hard I struggled, but I was too embarrassed to tell him why I would always fall asleep. Mr. Tapley would look up from his pile of work, run a hand through his thinning hair, and feed me just enough advice to get me through the weekend, to bury myself in my homework assignments. As much as I labored through the week, I tried to schedule every other weekend off, on the off chance of visiting Father in San Francisco, page 285. Over the years, I had left hundreds of messages to all the fire stations throughout the city. Father never called back. One afternoon I lost it when a hesitant fireman tried to put me off. "Is this the right station?" I pleaded. "Just tell me, what shift does he work?" I begged, raising my voice. Stephen works at different stations at different times. We'll get this message to him," the fireman said, before the line went dead. I knew something was horribly wrong. Alice tried to stop me from fleeing her home. "My dad's in trouble," I shouted, my chest heaving. "David, you don't know that," Alice blasted back. "That's exactly what I mean," I said, pointing a finger at her. "I'm tired of living in the dark, of hiding secrets, of living a lie. What can be so bad? If my dad's in trouble..." I stopped for a moment as my imagination began to take hold. "I just have to know," I said, kissing Alice on the forehead. I hopped on my motorcycle and I sped off to the heart of San Francisco. On the freeway, I dodged and swerved through the traffic, and I didn't slow down until my motorcycle rumbled into the alley. Page 286. Next to 1067 Post Street, the same fire station that Father had been assigned to since I was a baby. I parked my motorcycle by the back entrance of the station. As I walked up the steep incline, I noticed an old, familiar face. At first, I thought the face belonged to my father, but I knew it wasn't him. When the face smiled, Father never smiled. "My Lord, son, how long's it been? I haven't seen you boys in I don't know how long." I shook hands with Uncle Lee, my father's longtime partner, and his best friend. "Where's Dad?" I asked in a stern voice. Uncle Lee turned away. "Well, he just left. He just went off shift." "No, sir," I demanded. I knew Uncle Lee was lying. Firemen change shifts in the morning, not in the middle of the afternoon. I lowered my defenses. "Uncle Lee, I haven't seen Dad in years. I have to know." Lee seemed choked up. He rubbed a tear from the corner of his eye. "Your father and I started out together, you know. I gotta tell you, your old man was one hell of a fireman. There was times when I thought we wouldn't make it." I could feel it coming. My insides became unglued. My eyes searched for something to grab onto. Page 287. To keep me from falling, I bit my lip. I nodded my head as if telling Uncle Lee just to let me out, tell me. Lee's eyes blinked, showing that he understood. Your father. He doesn't work for the department anymore, Stephen. Your father was asked to retire early. I let out a sigh of relief as I fought to control my feelings. So he's alive? He's okay? Where is he? I shrieked. Uncle Lee laid it all down, telling me that Father had not had work for over a year. So, when his money ran out, he moved from place to place, and at times Lee feared that Father slept on the street. David, it's the booze. It's killing him, he said in a soft but firm tone. So where is he now? I begged. I don't know, son. I only see him when he needs a few bucks. Uncle Lee stopped for a moment to clear his throat. He looked at me in a way he had never had before. David, don't be too hard on your old man. He never really had a family. He was a young man when he first came here to the city, and he loved you kids. But that marriage destroyed him. His job wasn't easy on him either. It's all that kept him going. He lived for the station. Page 288. But his drinking, it's all that he knows. Thanks, Uncle Lee, I said as I shook his hand. Thanks for not putting me off. At least now I know. Uncle Lee walked me down to his motorcycle. I should see your dad in a few days. Hell, maybe you can help him out of this mess. Yeah, I replied, maybe. 2 weekends later, I rode on a Greyhound bus to the Mission District of San Francisco. At the bus station, I waited for Father for about an hour. From the outside, I spotted a run-down bar, and I took a chance, walked across the street, and found Father slumped over on the table. My head swirled around, searching for help. I couldn't believe how people strolled by Father's table without the slightest concern, or sat by the bar nursing their drinks as if my father were invisible. I gently shook my childhood superhero from his slumber. Father's coughing seemed to awaken him. His stench was so bad that I held my breath until I could help him stumble from the bar. The outside air seemed to clear his head. In the sunlight, Father looked worse than I ever imagined. I deliberately did not look at his face. I wanted to remember my father for the man he once was, the tall, rugged, strong firefighter with gleaming white teeth. Page 289. Who placed himself in danger to help a fellow fireman or to rescue a child from a burning building. Father and I walked for several blocks without saying a word, and I knew better than to question him on his drinking or his lifestyle. But Uncle Lee's warning about doing something, anything to help Father, echoed in my mind, and without thinking I closed my eyes, spun around, and held out my hand, stopping him. What happened, Dad? Father stopped and let out a hacking cough. His hands trembled as he struggled to light a cigarette. You'd be better off forgetting all about it, the whole thing. Your mother, the house, everything. It never happened. Father took a deep drag. I tried to look into his eyes, but he kept dodging my glance. It's your mother. She's crazy. You'd be better off forgetting the whole thing, he ordered with a wave of his hand, as if sweeping the family secret under the carpet for the final time. No, Dad, it's you. I'm worried about you. A chill blew across my face. My body shuddered, and I clamped my eyes shut. I wanted to cry out to Father, and yet I didn't have the guts to tell him how much I was scared for him. My brain struggled with what was right and what was proper. I knew, by Father's look, that his life was his business, and that no one ever questioned a father's authority. But he was walking death. Page 290. His hands rattled every few seconds, and his eyelids were drooped so low that he could barely see. I felt so awkward. I didn't want to make Father mad, but I soon found myself becoming upset. Why weren't you there for me? Couldn't you have at least called me? Can't you be a regular dad with a job and a family so I could be with you and play catch or go fishing? Why can't you be normal? My brain screamed. I sucked in a deep breath before I opened my eyes. I'm sorry, it's just that you're my dad, and I love you. Father wheezed as he turned away. I knew he had heard me, but he couldn't bring himself to reply. The river of alcohol and the destroyed family life had stripped him of his innermost feelings. I realized that inside, my father was truly dead. Moments later, he and I continued our journey to nowhere, with our heads bent down, looking at no one, especially not ourselves. Hours later, before Father loaded me onto the bus, he pulled me aside. I want to show you something, he said, with pride, and he reached behind him and he plucked out a black leather covering with the emblem of the fireman's shield on it. Father smiled and he opened the casing, revealing a bright, shiny silver fireman's badge. Page 291. Here, hold it, he said as he gently placed the badge in my open palms. R-1522, I read aloud, knowing that the R signified that Father was indeed retired, not fired as I had feared, while the numbers were those assigned to Father when he first joined. It's all I have now. That's one of the only things in my life that I didn't screw up too badly. No one can ever take that away from me, he stated with conviction, pointing to his prize. Someday you'll understand. I nodded my head. I understood. I always had. In the past, I had imagined Father, dressed in his crisp, dark blue fireman's uniform, as he strolled to the podium to receive his badge of honor, in front of a frenzied crowd shouting his name, with a beautiful wife and a family standing by his side. As a child, I had dreamed of Father's big day. I now looked into his eyes, and as I gave him his lifetime achievement, I'm really proud of you, Dad, I said, gazing down at the badge. I truly am. And for a split second, Father's eyes gleamed. And for a moment in time, his pain disappeared. A few minutes later, Father stopped me on the steps of the bus, and he hesitated. His eyes looked down. Page 292. Get out of here, he mumbled. David, get as far away from here as you can. Your brother Ronald joined the service, and you're almost at that age. Get out, Father said as he patted my shoulder. As he turned away, his final words were, do what you have to. Don't end up like me. I pressed my face to the window of the bus, and I strained my eyes as I watched Father disappear into the crowd. I wanted to jump off and hug him, to hold his hand or sit by his side the way I did as a child whenever he read his evening paper, like the dad I knew so many years ago. I wanted him to be part of my life. I wanted a dad. And as the bus lumbered out of San Francisco, I lost control of my emotions and I cried inside. I clenched my fist as tremendous pressure I had stored for years burst inside my soul. I realized the horribly lonely life that Father lived, and I prayed with all my heart that God would watch over him, keep him warm at night, free him from any harm. A mountain of guilt weighed in on my shoulders, and I felt so bad for everything in Father's life. After visiting Uncle Lee, I had fantasized that maybe I could buy a home in Goinville and have Father move in. Page 293. Only then I could help ease his pain. We could spend some time together as father and son. But I knew, as always, that fantasies were dreams and reality was life. I cried throughout the bus ride to Alice's home, and I knew that Father was dying, and I became terrified I would never see him again. Months afterward, during the summer of 1978, after dozens of interviews, I landed a job selling cars. Selling cars was mentally exhausting. The upper managers would threaten the sales staff one day and then bait us with money incentives the next. Competition was fierce, but I somehow managed to keep my head above water. If I had a weekend off, I'd race over to Dunsmore and forget about having to be an adult, as Paul, Dave, and I searched for new adventures on four wheels, loaned to me by the car dealer. Once, after seeing a movie on Hollywood stuntmen, the three of us sat facing forward as I drove backward in a perfectly straight line, without looking behind my back. Our stunt caused a few wrecks with confused drivers, and the three of us had a few minor scrapes with the law, but I knew my adventures and my adventurous times would be coming to an end when Paul and Dave matured and began to look for jobs, too. Page 294. More than ever, I sought guidance from Dunsmore Drive. One time, Dan drove to Alice's home so he could talk me out of a pipe dream of becoming a Hollywood stuntman. With his son Paul by his side, Mr. Brazil spent hours of his time telling me how foolish I was. I'd always been fond of Dan, and as I walked him and Paul outside after abandoning my lame idea, I realized that I was closer to Dan than I was to my own father. The Marshes were just as caring. Many times I'd help Sandra with her housework, as I learned other ways to become self-sufficient. Mr. Marsh recommended that I join the service, and immediately I'd think of the Air Force. But as a freshman in high school, I had taken the aptitude test and I had failed miserably. I had convinced myself that I could make it in the outside world without any schooling. Summer passed, and I decided, because I was almost 18, and I had to make money in order to survive, to drop out of high school. Alice was livid, but my career as a salesman was on the rise. Out of a sales staff of over 40, I was consistently one of the top 5 salesmen. But months after my 18th birthday, the recession hit. Gas prices shot up, my savings withered, and the reality of going nowhere fast hit me in the face. Page 295. To escape my troubles, one Sunday, I rode off in my beat-up orange 65 Mustang, and I headed north to find the Russian River. I didn't know exactly how to get there, but I drove by instinct, relying on my memories as a child, and when I sensed the correct exit, I turned off, and I knew I was close when the towering redwood trees filled my windshield. My heart seemed to skip a beat when I parked my car at the old Safeway supermarket. My eyes gaped at the same aisle that I had strolled through as a child, and at the checkout counter I dug through my pants pockets and I spent the last of my splurge money on a stick of salami and a loaf of French bread. I sat on a deserted sandbar at Johnson's Beach, and I slowly gnawed on my lunch, listening to the rippling sounds of the Russian River and the scraping metal of an oversized motorhome rumbled away across a narrow evergreen bridge. I found myself at peace. In order to fulfill my vow of living at the Russian River, I knew I had to first find myself. I couldn't do it living so close to my past. I had to break away. As I collected my trash and walked away from the beach, the sun shone on my shoulders. I felt warm inside. I had made a decision. Turning to face the river one last time, I felt like crying. Page 296. If I wanted to, I could move to the river, but I knew it wouldn't be right. I took in a deep breath and I spoke in a slow voice, renewing my lifelong promise. I will be back. Months later, after obtaining my high school GED, completing a series of tests and background checks, I proudly enlisted into the United States Air Force. Somehow, word got up to my mother, and she called me a day before I was to report for basic training. Her voice wasn't that of the evil mother, but my mommy from years ago, and I could almost see mommy's face on the other end of the phone as she cried. She claimed she thought of me all the time, that she'd always wanted nothing but the best for me, and we talked for over an hour, and I strained my ear in hopes of hearing the 3 most important words I had wanted my mom to say all my life. Alice stood beside me as I cried into the telephone. I wanted to be with my mom. I wanted to see her face in hopes of hearing those 3 words, and I realized that I was being foolish, but I felt I should at least try. It took all of Alice's persuasive powers to keep me from visiting Mom, but in my heart I knew that Mother was just toying with my emotions For over 18 years, I had wanted something I knew I would never receive. Mom's love. Page 297. Without a word, Alice opened her arms, and as she held me, I suddenly realized that my lifelong search for love and acceptance had finally ended in the arms of a foster parent. The next day, I stood tall, and I looked into Harold's blue eyes. "Be good now, son," he said. "I will, sir. You watch. I'll make you proud." Alice stood beside her husband. "You know who you are. You've always known," she said, as she held out her hand and gave me a shiny yellow key. "This is your home. It always has been. This will always be your home." I pocketed the key to my home, and after kissing Alice, my mother, and shaking Harold, my father's, hand, I opened my mouth to say something appropriate, but this moment in time needed no words, for we knew what we all felt, the love of a family. Hours later, as the Boeing 727 banked its way from California, I closed my eyes for a final time, as a lost boy. I pictured the Sarge, Michael Marsh, in all his glory, with his eyes pierced toward the sky when he said, "Well, Airman Pelzer, any thoughts?" "Well," I had replied, "I'm a little scared. But," page 298, "I could use this to my advantage. I have a master plan, I'm focused, and I know I'm going to make it." Then my mentor had glanced down at me and smiled. "Good on you, Pels man, get some." Aboard my first plane ride, I opened my eyes for the first time as a man named Dave, and I chuckled to myself. Now the adventure begins. Epilogue. Epilogue of the book. December 1993. Sonoma County, California. I'm alone. On the outside, I'm so cold that my entire body shivers. The tips of my fingers have been numb for some time, and as I exhale, a frosty mist escapes through my nose. In the distance, I can hear the rumbling sounds of dark gray clouds colliding against each other, and a few seconds later, thunder echoes from the nearby hills. I can see a cloudburst approaching. I don't mind. I'm sitting on top of an old, rotted log in front of a long stretch of empty beach. I love gazing at the splendor of the powerful, dark green waves that form into a curl before pounding on the beach. A coat of salty spray covers my glasses. Page 300. On the inside, I'm warm. I'm no longer afraid of being alone. I love spending time by myself. From above, a flock of seagulls squawks at each other as the birds comb the beach in search of any morsel of food. Moments later, a single seagull struggles to maintain flight. As much as that bird pounds its wings, it cannot keep up with the flock, let alone maintain altitude. And without warning, the gull crashes beak first into the sand. The bird flops up, hobbles on, a single webbed orange leg. And after a short search, the seagull finds a fragment of food. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the flock of seagulls returns, hovers above the beach, and then dives to pick on the weaker gull for its meal. The gull seems to know it cannot flee, so it stands its ground and pecks at the other birds with furious intensity. Within a blink of an eye, the struggle is over, and the flock of birds flies off in search of an easier victim. Seagull screeches as the flock, as if telling them that it was victorious. Then it turns towards me and squawks a warning. As I study the gull's movements, I recall how its battle mirrored my own challenges while in foster care. Back then, nothing was more important than wanting to be accepted. And finding the answers to my past. But the more I matured on the inside, the more I realized I had to carve my own path. I also learned to be content in not finding all the answers of my quest. But like most things in my life, my answers seemed to come without effort after I joined the United States Air Force, where I achieved my lifelong dream of flying. As an adult, I came full circle. One of the things I accomplished was visiting my mother and asking her the most important question of my life. Why? Mother's own secret made me cherish the life that I had led even more. The screeching sound of the seagulls breaks my trance. In front of me, my hands quiver, but it's not from the cold. I wipe a stream of tears from my cheeks. I don't cry for myself as much as I do for my mother. I began to cry so hard that my body shakes. I can't stop. I cry for my mother, my father, that I never had. The shame of the family secret. I become unglued because at times I have doubts about making a difference in the lives of others, and I feel unworthy for recognition that I've received. I cry to let everything out. I close my eyes and I say a quick prayer. I pray for wisdom to become a better, stronger person. As I stand up, page 302, facing the dark green ocean, I feel cleansed inside. It's time to move on. After a relaxing drive with the windows rolled down and listening to Pat Metheny's secret story, I park my 4Runner in front of my second home, the Rio Villa in Monte Rio. The owners, Rick and Don, wave as they scurry about to prepare for their incoming guests. The serene beauty of the Rio Villa still takes my breath away. For years now, Rick and Don have gone out of their way to make my son, Stephen, and me feel a part of their family. To be welcome means so much to me. After I wrestle him to the floor, Stephen wraps his arms around my neck. "You okay?" he asks. Even though he's only a child, in so many ways, Stephen's sensitivity is beyond his years. I'm amazed that at times he can feel my innermost feelings. As much as he is my son, Stephen is also one of my closest friends, and the two of us spend the remainder of the day designing multicolored, creepy-crawler plastic toys, playing Sorry and Monopoly, over and over again. I quickly discover that my years of training in military strategy are no match for the mind of a ruthless 7-year-old who acquires both Park Place and Boardwalk with hotels. I still owe Stephen back rent. Page 303. After several annihilating lessons of Sorry, Stephen and I make our way down to the deck by the Russian River. A thick odor of burning wood mixes in with the sweet aroma of redwood trees. The shallow green river becomes transparent, with only a soft trickling sound that makes the water real. As the sun disappears behind a hill, the reflection of a Christmas tree shimmers from across the river. A blanket of fog seeps down from the hills, and without a word, Stephen and I join hands. I can feel a lump creep in my throat as we tighten our grip. Stephen clamps onto my leg. "Love you, Dad. Happy birthday." Years ago, I truly doubted whether I'd make it out alive. In my former life, I had very little. Today, as I stand in my utopia, I have what every person could wish for: a life and the love of my son. Stephen and I are a family. The end. That's the end of the book, The Lost Boy. Hope you liked it.